Do you ever wonder what the people around you think about you? And my name's Ron. I am glad to be here this morning. I get to serve on our pastor team, and we are glad. I'm just enjoy worshiping with you this morning. It was awesome. And for you that are joining us online, we are glad you're with us. Do you ever wonder what someone next to you or around you is thinking about you? What if you had a magic pill that could let you hear everything the person next to you or near you was thinking? Maybe what they're thinking about you specifically. That might not be encouraging. Would you change what you're saying? Would you change how you're acting or what you're doing? Would you try to please the people that you could hear if you knew what they were thinking? I think for some of us, maybe that would bring a little self-awareness that might be helpful. But I think for most of us, the insecurities and our fears and our worries would just go on overdrive. And it might paralyze us. Because for most of us, we care about what other people think of us, don't we? We do care. So think about a few of these with me. Have you ever apologized to someone else when they bump into you? You might struggle with trying to please people. Have you ever struggled to say no to someone because you were worried about what they were going to think of you? You might struggle with people pleasing. Maybe at work or with your friends, have you ever kept your opinion to yourself when you're making a decision? Maybe it's where to go out to eat or what to do in the afternoon or a project at work. And you kind of kept your opinion to yourself because you wanted to feel like part of the group. You might struggle with trying to please people. Do you find yourself apologizing to your Roomba for the mess you're making it clean up? You might be a people pleaser. You know, I've struggled with all of those things, except for the last one. I'm really not a machine pleaser. That's not who I am. But we struggle with that. Why? Because we want to please people. Most of us really want acceptance. We want to be accepted. We sometimes get twisted into the idea that we got to rely on people to find that acceptance. Sometimes we even get to the point where we think we need the acceptance of people to feel happy, to feel fulfilled. Feeling rejected can be painful. Why? Because rejection is the opposite of acceptance. And so it can be painful when we feel rejected. We want to feel accepted. Maybe at school or at work, from our peers or our coworkers, maybe from our superiors. When we get rejected, it hurts, and it can hurt deeply. Sometimes from a teacher, a coach, a boss. But then take it one step further. Rejection hurts even worse when it's from those that are closest to us, from our siblings or from our relatives. Rejection can hurt. And it feels even deeper when it's from our parents or our closest friends. Rejection hurts. For some of us, rejection can cause us to think poorly of ourselves. We can start putting ourselves down in our mind, can't we? For some of us, we can even be paralyzed and we can stop making choices or even taking action at all because of rejection. And then for some of us, we get numbed because of the rejection, numb to people, hardened to people. And it can cause us to have the attitude of, hey, so what? Hey, see if I care. we become hardened. But what if there's another option? What if there's another option? And would you take a look with me at how Jesus responded to rejection? I'm going to be in Mark chapter 6. We'll be on page 806 in the chair Bible. And if you need a Bible, please keep that one that's in your row as our gift to you. We would love you to take that or give it to a friend to be able to use and engage in God's word. So Mark chapter 6, page 806. And as we've been going through the book of Mark, we've seen Jesus serving with compassion all the way through. In every account that we've looked at, he's served the people around him that were rejected. He has treated the disciples with compassion when they were in the middle of the storm and then when they lacked faith. And Jesus served with the suffering. He served the people that were cast aside by society. And in all of those accounts, Jesus had pretty much widespread acceptance. He had effectiveness. He was meeting people's needs. He was doing miracles. The crowds were flocking to him. People pursued him because of his wisdom, his wise teaching, and because of the miracles that he was doing. Jesus had been doing all of this service to many, many people in all the different villages. In what region were we focused on? The Sea of Galilee. So we've been all over the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus has been ministering and serving. And so as we jump into Mark chapter 6, verse 1, that's exactly where Jesus has been. So take a look at verse 1. Jesus left that part of the country and returned with his disciples to Nazareth, his hometown. So Jesus has been serving and working, and he's worked so hard that I think he's tired. Maybe he wants some little bit of R&R. If you think about it, the crowds have been overwhelming, and they've been flocking to him every day. There's been an endless stream of people, and they want to hear him teaching. They want to see the miracles. They want to be healed. And it's exhausting. And Jesus has continued to serve. And so he heads back home to his hometown, to Nazareth. And just as you picture that, with the Sea of Galilee, it's about 15 miles from the Sea of Galilee. So maybe less than a day's walk, but I imagine that Jesus has been stopped by people all the way along the trail to continue to hear from him and to meet with him and to ask for healing. And so maybe a couple days, he journeys, he comes home to Nazareth. And Nazareth is a small village. If you picture the size of the church property here, and maybe include some of Raymond's property, and you'll have about the size of the village of Nazareth, about 10 acres. Some of you have properties bigger than the town of Nazareth. And Jesus is heading home to his hometown. In his town was about the size of 200 people. So you think of all the people and kids here today in our church this morning, about half of them make up the town of Nazareth. Very small town. People would have lived there for generations and generations. They would have lived in close proximity. They would have known everybody and known everybody else's business. There wouldn't have been anybody who could sneak in or to do things without the whole town knowing what was going on. It would have been comforting, though, for Jesus to return home. He's the hometown boy. He's been out. He can come home and rest. Take a look at verse 2. The next Sabbath, he began teaching in the synagogue. So he goes to the synagogue, to their place of worship, to their place of study, where they put God first on the Sabbath. He says, and many who heard him were amazed. Wow, look at what this guy is teaching. This guy teaches with the authority that our rabbi doesn't teach with. And the teaching of that time was continually citing someone else, quoting someone else. he says this and he said that, and because of that, maybe this. And they didn't speak with authority. And Jesus said, here's the truth. Let me tell you what the truth is. They're amazed. And they ask, where did he get all this wisdom and the power to perform such miracles? The people there that day just hadn't seen this before. And this isn't what they remembered of Jesus. They had known Jesus since he was a youth, as he has grown up. And Jesus taught here with confidence and authority. He wasn't surmising the truth like the other rabbis. He was projecting the truth, teaching the truth. And he knew and spoke directly to the people there. So the Bible doesn't tell us a lot about Jesus' childhood. There isn't a lot of accounts of him growing up, but the people here this day, they knew Jesus growing up. The Bible gives us one account that kind of gives us a picture, a window in to Jesus as a young boy growing up. And in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 51, you can check out that story. You can read through it and learn about that. One story gives us the picture that Jesus had God's wisdom even at a young age. See, Jesus' parents, they would go to Jerusalem once a year for the festival of Passover. And Jerusalem's about a 75-mile trip down to Jerusalem, depending on how you go, 75 to 100 miles. It probably took 4 days to a week for them to travel all the way to Jerusalem. And his whole extended family that would go, Mary and Joseph, probably the aunts and the uncles, the cousins, the whole group from Nazareth would have traveled down together in one caravan, and Jesus was a part of these trips. At the end of one of these festivals, Jesus was about 12 years old. Kind of picture the situation. They've been in Jerusalem. They've been through the feasting and through the celebration. Israel's bustling with people. And they pack up as a family and they start to head back to Nazareth. And about a day into this trip, Mary and Joseph realize young Jesus isn't there. They just figured, we're all packing up, the whole family's packing up, all these people, who knows, maybe 20, 30, 40 people all heading back to Jerusalem together. He's got to be with one of the relatives. He's got to be there. And he wasn't. And so when they realized that, they headed back to Jerusalem. And after 3 days, they finally found him. They went to the temple, and they found Jesus there in the temple, talking with the priests and the scribes and the leaders of Judaism. And they're asking him questions, and he's asking them questions, and he's answering, and they are amazed at Jesus' understanding and his answers. Even as a preteen, Jesus was remarkable and clearly had wisdom. Beyond his years, beyond his peers, Jesus was wise. It says in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, it gives this summary. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and all the people. Young Jesus was probably popular. He's probably well-liked in Nazareth. But even so, he comes back home. Even though he showed huge promise as a youth, even though they knew he had wisdom beyond his years, his friends, his neighbors, his family were amazed. Who is this guy who is talking with such authority at the temple or at the synagogue this Sabbath in Nazareth? They're amazed. They've probably heard about the miracles, and they are hearing him teach. But for some people in that crowd that day, it just didn't add up. It didn't add up. Check out verse 3. Then they scoffed. He's just a carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas and Simon and his sisters live right here among us." And they were deeply offended and refused to believe him. People that day go from amazed at how he taught the truth to scoffing and offended. Who does he think he is? Wait, this is the kid that grew up next door. Who does he think he is to teach us? You kind of think about what their mind is doing at that point. I don't think the people at Nazareth were all that unusual in this situation. So we do this, don't we? We might remember the childish things maybe our nephew did while he was growing up, or our close neighbor. When he was little and out back, he used to make mud pies. When the little boy in middle school, he grew up and he started digging a pond in Mrs. Nelson's garden. And our mind starts going back to those childish things, right? Maybe the time when he was mowing your grass, you had him help you out for a Saturday afternoon. He's mowing your grass and your wife's flowers ended up chopped to little bits. And then you see him all grown up. He's graduated college. He started his own business. He's working hard and he is effective in the community, but your view of him is still limited by your memory of the childish things he did when he was growing up. We would never do that, would we? The thing is, you refuse to take him seriously and believe that he can do anything effective now. He can't be doing anything important, could he? Remember what he did. Remember who he was. And I think it's that way for Jesus' old acquaintances. He's coming back home, but all they can see is the little kid that they watched grow up. And they rejected him. And they rejected his message. Check out verses 4 and 5. Then Jesus told them, "A prophet is honored everywhere except in his own hometown and among his relatives and his own family." And because of their unbelief, he couldn't do any miracles among them except to place hands on a few sick people and to heal them. Jesus looks at them and he speaks out to the crowd of people there and he says, "A prophet is honored everywhere except in his hometown." And they knew he was speaking right to them, looking right in their eyes. And Jesus infuriated them. He infuriated them. Not only was the little kid next door teaching them with more confidence than their very own rabbi, but now he's referring to himself as a prophet. And now he's saying that they're rejecting the prophet. See, many of the Old Testament prophets before Jesus were rejected by Israel. And when Jesus' neighbors and friends and family rejected him, they end up missing out. It says in that verse, he didn't do any major miracles there. Why is that? Not that Jesus, with the power of God, had no possibility. But without faith connected to the miracle, then that miracle wouldn't have honored God. Faith separated. So the miracle needed to be connected to faith, and then it pointed to and honored God. I think the same is for today. When we reject Jesus, we miss out too. Jesus' hometown missed out. They missed out. And when we reject Jesus, we miss out. When we fail to trust in him and put our reliance on him, even in our everyday struggles, we're the ones that miss out on seeing what he could do. Sometimes we think of, what can I do? And if I can't do it, I struggle to trust whether it can be done. And when we fail to rely on what God can do, we miss out on seeing great things happen. But check out Jesus' reaction. Verse 6. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Jesus was amazed. At first, the crowd was amazed, and now we kind of shifted, and now Jesus is amazed. He marvels at their unbelief. And throughout the Gospels, only two things amaze Jesus: faith and the lack of faith. And I think often we think of our lack of faith in the sense of it's sensible, it's understandable that I'm not trusting right now. We've got our conditions, we've got our excuses. I think it makes sense. We just are struggling to trust right now. But Jesus knows our situation. And God's all powerful. He can handle our situation. So the most sensible answer, the only sensible answer, is to trust him. And Jesus marvels that they haven't trusted him. These people were close to Jesus. They knew him. They didn't accept him. Jesus, he didn't change his image in this situation. He didn't try to please the people like sometimes we do. He didn't change his message to try and fit into the synagogue. He didn't go to get the approval of the rabbi. He didn't try to rally the troops and get them to agree with him. And he didn't shut down. And as we're going to see, he didn't slow down. He kept pursuing God's mission. And despite the rejection, I believe Jesus looks out over that group that day, and in compassion, he kept teaching. He kept spreading the message from village to village. Look at the end of this verse. Then Jesus went from village to village teaching the people. He didn't shut down. He didn't stop. He wasn't put off by the rejection. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't despondent. He kept teaching. And he went from village to village. He kept serving the people. He chose to keep pursuing the mission. Look at verse 7. Then Jesus called his 12 disciples together, and he began sending them out, 2 by 2, giving them authority to cast out evil spirits. He redoubles his efforts, doesn't he? So he didn't slow down. He kept going forward. He pursued it more. He said, let me send out teams. Now it's Jesus plus 6 teams of 2. And despite the recent rejection, Jesus looks at compassion on the region, and he keeps reaching more people. He saw the communities. He saw that they had a need and an opportunity to believe. I think at Berean, our values and our vision fit right into what Jesus is doing here. One of our key values is to be team-led. And Jesus sends out teams here. And it's really important because 2 are better than 1. 2 bring strength, encouragement, accountability. 2 minds are better than 1. We love teams here at Berean. We want to work together because of what can be done so much stronger together. We love the principle of multiplication. Jesus has been training these 12 men. Now he's sending them out in all different directions Jesus can only be at one place at one time. But now he's got 7 places. He's going to village, and the teams are all going to 6 more villages. Jesus trains them and sends them out. And I think Jesus would look at our rural area and our communities, and I believe he'd look with compassion on them. He would love them, and he'd want them to have the opportunity to believe. And so we want to train and raise up teams. We want to see multiplication happen. And we desire to be a turnover church. We use that language, and what does that mean? It just means we want to impact communities with the gospel and plant new campuses and make more and better Jesus followers, impacting the entire region for Jesus. That's exactly what Jesus is doing here. We want to be a training center where leaders can be trained and given practical everyday experience and then sent out to the Northeast, throughout the Northeast, and impact more and more communities. Because if you take 5 people and they each reach 1, you've got 10 people. 10 people transformed by the message of the gospel. But take those same 5 people and train them to reach 5 more each, and now you've impacted 25 people with the gospel. We want to see the region transformed. Our vision follows exactly what Jesus is doing here with his disciples. Rather than quit, Jesus chose to serve. And he challenged his team to serve. And he empowered them to serve. And he gives them a few instructions. Just check out his instructions. Verse 8. He told them to take nothing for their journey except a walking stick, no food, no traveler's bag, no money. They're going to totally rely on Jewish hospitality and God's direction. He allowed them to wear sandals, but not to take a change of clothes. He says, wherever you go, stay in the same house until you leave. But if any place refuses to welcome you or to listen to you, shake its dust off your feet as you leave to show you have abandoned those people to their fate. That sounds really harsh. Jesus is giving them instructions, saying you're going to rely on God, you're going to rely on the hospitality of the Jewish community you're in, you're going to give them the truth. If they refuse, you're going to keep on going. Jesus doesn't say, seek a stranger's acceptance, and if they don't respond, try harder to please them. Give them nice gifts. Beg them to receive you. Do their work for them. Plead with... No, he doesn't say any of those things. Jesus tells his friends to use effective use of their time and effort. Be effective. He says if a town rejects, don't get stalled there. Don't waste your time there. Don't waste your focus there. Instead, accept the rejection and move on to a village that's far more receptive. Luke was compiling his gospel, and he went to eyewitnesses, and he put the witnesses' accounts all together, and he put it in the Gospel of Luke. And it's a different perspective on Jesus' ministry. When he describes this exact situation, he makes this statement. Then he said to the disciples, anyone who accepts your message is also accepting who? Me. He said, they're accepting me. It's not about you. So anyone who rejects you is rejecting who? Me. He's rejecting Jesus. And anyone who rejects me is rejecting who? God, who sent me. Jesus here is telling the disciples, don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. It feels personal because you're the one standing there. Maybe you've felt that. Jesus says, ultimately, it's about me that they're rejection. It's about God that they're rejecting. And if Jesus can overlook the intensely personal rejection of his very own hometown, the people he grew up with, the family that he has, if he can overlook that to share the gospel, to share the truth, then maybe we can. Maybe we can overlook the not so personal rejection because they're really rejecting God. What I love here in Mark and in Luke is there's no anger. Jesus is not giving them the authority to judge. Instead, he's just saying more people need to hear. And if they've rejected, move on to the more people that need to hear. Maybe it's just not their time yet. Maybe they'll have another opportunity. But move on and share with the people who need to hear. Check out the result. Verse 12, right back to Mark chapter 6. So the disciples went out, telling everyone they met to repent of their sins and turn to God. What a message. Turn away from where you're going and head to God. And they cast out many demons and they healed many sick people, anointing them with olive oil. The disciples were going out and they were being the hands and the feet of Jesus. They were caring for people's needs. They were helping them. And they were sharing the message that Jesus had shared and that they had seen Jesus share. The rejection didn't discourage Jesus. Instead, he chose to keep serving. I believe we can respond to rejection with service. We can help people. We can be the hands and feet of Jesus, and we can share his message. For Jesus, rejection became a motivation to reach more people. Often rejection is a motivation for us to just kind of shut down. But for Jesus, he moved forward and he wanted to reach more. And the result was that many, many more people heard the message. Many, many more people had the opportunity to believe. So even when people reject us, keep on showing and sharing Jesus. Keep on showing him. Keep on sharing that message. Have you ever shared your faith and found that it wasn't received well? Some of you guys can realize, I see the heads moving. Have you ever avoided sharing your faith because you anticipated rejection? I see some heads moving. I think probably less of us want to say that. But I think we've all felt both of those, haven't we? I've felt those. Many of us take rejection, or maybe even the possibility of rejection, as a reason not to share our faith. Probably because we often desire acceptance. We want to avoid anything that might separate us from our friends. It might be something that might push them away. It might put a little awkwardness into the relationship. Maybe we carry the pain and the hurt of rejection that we've received in the past. It hurts. We don't want to be treated that way again. Jesus understands our hurt. He has felt the sting of rejection. And I'm preparing for this message and looking at this account. And I thought back to what was written of him way before his ministry in Psalm 118. And the writer said this: the stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. For us, I think often rejection is seen as the end. But for Jesus, it was just the beginning. It was the foundation. And he received rejection here in his hometown, but he lived his entire life. He taught for 3 years. He presented his truth. And the end of that was the ultimate rejection. And Jesus died in rejection, knowing that he would make the cornerstone of our faith. It would all be built on that. Sin would be paid for. It would be finished, complete. Jesus could have tried to please the people, or he could have retreated for his own safety. He could have protected himself. He could have sought his own comfort, but instead he pressed forward and he started a movement that continues today, 2,000 years later. A movement that still will continue to the end of time. A movement that is making more and better Jesus followers. And he's the cornerstone of it all. Jesus told his friends shortly before his death, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. See, Jesus has been there, and he has overcome rejection. And when our trust is in Jesus, we find acceptance, and we can find confidence to share his life and to share his love. No matter how others might respond, we can push forward for Jesus. One of Jesus' closest friends put it this way. He said he came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believed in him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. John's speaking to us right there. Jesus served confidently knowing that he was the Son of God, that he is the Son of God. People's rejection couldn't change that. And we can confidently serve knowing that we are God's children, regardless of anybody else's opinion. I am God's child. If you're here this morning and you've placed your faith and trust in Jesus, would you just say with me, I am God's child. I am God's child. And as God's children, you're accepted, you are loved, you're held, regardless of anybody else's opinions, regardless of how you're treated. God's children are called to share Jesus. Jesus challenged his disciples just before he went to be with the Father. He challenged them to make more disciples and to teach those disciples to follow him and to do everything that he had taught them. Disciples that would make more and more disciples. And he's speaking to us there to make more and better Jesus followers. And when we share Jesus, even when we're rejected, so Jesus was rejected. And if we're going to share him, we're going to face some rejection. But we aren't trying to please people. And I love how Paul kind of summed up his ministry in this area. We have the opportunity to show Jesus to other people regardless of how we're treated. Something disappeared. And that's all right. Paul summed up his ministry and he said, I'm not trying to please people. I am ultimately trying to please God. And we've got that same opportunity. We can either put people first and say, I'm going to please them, or I'm going to do what God called me to do, and I'm going to give them what matters most. I'm going to give them the love of Christ. I'm going to live that out, and I'm going to give them the message of Christ and give them the truth. So not everybody is open to hearing about Jesus. But surveys tell us that 2 out of every people are willing to listen to their friend if they share their faith. So don't give up. Don't give up. Show your neighbors, show your friends, show your family Jesus' love, show them his life, show them his message. Share your story. Share the message of Jesus. And if one person isn't ready to listen, that's okay. Share with someone else. Even in rejection, show Jesus to other people. Ultimately, when it comes to sharing your faith, true success isn't the acceptance of other people. True acceptance is all about obedience to Jesus. True success says, I'm going to do what Jesus asked me to do. And I'm going to really leave the results up to God. I'll leave it all in his hands. I remember a hymn growing up that got this right. And it had a simple phrase. It said, trust and obey. For there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. So we aren't responsible for the results, but we are responsible to share the truth. See, it's not my job to save my neighbor. As if I could ever do that. Jesus does that. Jesus changes hearts. Jesus changes people. But it is my responsibility to keep on sharing the message. It's my responsibility to show Jesus in my life, to share the truth of who Jesus is, even when I feel rejected. See, when we trust God's acceptance and we put God's acceptance above our own fear, we will have the confidence to step forward and share Jesus. When we choose to share Jesus instead of please people, we end up giving them the chance to accept the unconditional love and the unconditional acceptance that we've received already. As we make this choice together, I believe God's going to multiply the effects, and he's going to turn this region upside down. And God will be glorified. Would you pray with me this morning? Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you. Thank you that you came for us. And that nothing you ran into on this earth, Jesus, ever stopped you from pursuing your mission. And it didn't stop you from pursuing me and pursuing us in this room today. God, maybe there's someone here today that's never accepted the message that Jesus came for them, that he died for them, that he paid for their sin. That he offers forgiveness and acceptance, that he wants them to be his child. God, if they've never trusted in Jesus, if they've never put their faith and trust in you, I ask that you'd make today that day, that you would open them right now, that they would say, yes, Jesus, I want you in my life. I want salvation. I want your forgiveness. I want to be your child. God, I pray that the rejection that we experience sometimes won't ever hold us back from loving other people, from sharing your message. God, would you give us a freedom from that? Would you give us a freedom from trying to please people? And that we would pursue a life that wants to please you. That pursues what is most important. Our relationship with you and sharing that relationship with others. Loving you and loving people. God, prick our hearts. Help us to yield to you and to share your love. In Jesus' name.